And Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin, member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, also a member of the president's impeachment defense team. Congressman, thanks for being here. Your thoughts as this gets ready to get underway and we hear the opening statements from the House managers.
What we will see over the course of up to 24 hours over the next 3 days, the House impeachment managers will be telling their story. They aren't relying on 100% of the facts. What you'll see is a reliance on presumptions, on hearsay, in some case lies. They won't give important context as they talk about one particular witness or the other. For example, they might reference Ambassador Sondland. Odds are they're not going to talk about the president telling Ambassador Sondland that he didn't want anything from Ukraine, no quid pro quo. Probably won't tell the Senate or the American public in referencing Ambassador Sondland that he admitted that his claim that there was a quid pro quo was just a guess. Now, that's just one particular witness. And as the American public is listening over the course of today and the next couple days, it's important to realize Adam Schiff's track record. He was just called out on another lie yesterday, reported in Politico, misrepresenting some information involving this case in Lev Parnas. And fortunately, at the end of that process, you'll see the president's team have an opportunity to tell the rest of the story. It's basically the other 97% of this story. The Senate is filled with people who are critical thinkers. I'm sure many of them already have their mind made up. Others may be more open-minded to hear the arguments presented. For the American public, I'm sure that most people at this point are ready for our country to move forward, for us to unite, and to focus on important substantive issues that will help move our country forward.
Congressman, it does seem like a lot of people want to move forward and put all of this behind them. On the other hand, according to the polls, there's a majority that would like to hear from witnesses. How concerned are you, as we're seeing from some of these Republican senators, that if you're not open enough to making sure that this is a very fair process, very transparent process, that everyone can feel decently good about in the end? I don't think people are going to feel great about it no matter what happens, that it might come back to bite Republicans.
Well, the Senate hasn't decided not to hear from witnesses. The Senate has decided to hear opening arguments. One of the main issues with the articles of impeachment is that they don't actually allege a violation of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors as required by the Constitution. So there is an opportunity for the House impeachment managers to state their case, and the Senate will decide after the opening arguments, which is exactly the precedent that we saw during the Clinton impeachment. I was very involved on the House side. I was in the closed-door depositions, attended all the open hearings, both by the Intelligence Committee and the Judiciary Committee. And what we saw throughout that process, from the closed-door depositions, where it was withholding key facts, cherry-picking leaks, outright lying in other cases, understand that at no point did any Republican witness that was requested actually be granted by Adam Schiff or Jerry Nadler, other than the people who were actually on the Democratic list. I'm sorry, with regards to Adam Schiff, specifically during the closed-door depositions and then the open intelligence hearings. Additionally, the president's counsel couldn't be present. So yesterday, when Adam Schiff is standing on the Senate floor and he's saying that the president didn't exert executive privilege during that process, what he obviously will forget to point out, because that's how he rolls throughout this process, is that he didn't allow the president's counsel to even walk into the door to hear the testimony. So if a question's asked of Fiona Hill about a conversation Fiona Hill has with the president of the United States, the president's counsel isn't even there to exert executive privilege. You're requiring Fiona Hill or her attorney to do that for her. And I'll tell you, I'll add this last point, is that if a member of the Republicans were to try to exert the executive privilege, guess how Adam Schiff ruled every single time in those closed-door depositions whenever there was an objection? Because he was the prosecutor, the judge, jury, and the witness coach. Every time there was an objection, he always ruled in his own favor.
Last thing, quickly, Congressman, do you know, are there efforts behind the scenes to talk to some of those Republicans who may be considering witnesses to prevent them from doing that?
Some of the Republican senators, that is?
Yeah, the moderates who may consider voting for witnesses after these opening arguments happen.
I'm sure that conversation will be had. The first thing, just structurally on the legal argument, is that the House managers failed in their presentation to the Senate to actually allege that violation of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. So now they're going to make an argument, and then the Senate, as a deliberative body, whether you're conservative, moderate, liberal, Republican, Democrat, has that opportunity under the procedures enacted yesterday, just like the Clinton precedent, to decide whether or not they need to hear from additional witnesses. And by the way, I'm not even so convinced that John Bolton would be that good of a witness for the Democrats. So be careful, where they really want to go here, because if I was getting into business of calling witnesses, I would want to hear from Hunter Biden. I would want to hear from the whistleblower who started this all. I would want to hear from even Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler, who, by the way, are the two most important material fact witnesses if you want to dig into the obstruction of Congress charge. So it's a slippery slope, and I'm not sure that they'll want to go down that route. But between now and then, it's up to the House impeachment managers to even explain where there even is a constitutional violation, and they've failed to do that so far.
Senators making their way into the Senate chamber. Congressman Lee Zeldin, we appreciate your time.